Okay, so a few highlights from this system that we call the lymphatic or immune system. So with this system, what we're finding is that this one is a little bit similar to and a little bit different than the cardiovascular system. We're going to see that it works in conjunction with it. Its structure and to a certain extent, its function are going to align very well with what we know of the cardiovascular system. We know that it's going to be a series of vessels. So in this case, they are transporting fluids, but it's not going to be plasma. In this case, it's going to be a fluid that we call lymph. So what we find is that this system, it is a series of vessels that are routing fluid. So we see that similarity. And this is going to be collecting excess fluid that has been left behind in what we call the interstitial spaces. And so that's in the tissues, and it's going to be brought back to the cardiovascular system. Now, along the way, it's going to be cleaned, if you will, before we dump it back in. So that is part of what we say is the defensive function for this system as well. And when we hear the name or the term immunity, that refers to not only protecting you on a day-to-day basis, but over the long term as well. And so two major functions we've mentioned already, collecting these left behind fluids, kind of like the cleanup crew behind the cardiovascular system, routing them back to the cardiovascular system. So collecting excess fluids. Two, protecting the body, defending the body, cleaning up these fluids, as well as other types of infectious agents which may have gotten into the tissues of the body. And then third, the last function for the system is to help transport fats. Now that one we're not going to spend too much time on. We'll address it a little bit with the digestive system, but we'll spend more time on the fluid transport and most time on the bodily defenses. Okay, so again, if you have this system and you think about all of these blood vessels taking fluids and cells and nutrients and waste products, etc., around the body everywhere, imagine, if you will, a parallel system of vessels that are also going throughout the body. And so what we'll find is that that's going to be our immune system. And so just like you see here with the lymphatic vessels, right? See how they're depicted in green? Not actually green, but they want to differentiate it between the red and blue that we know for systemic arteries and veins. But notice that there are some differences as well. See how, remember how we have kind of a circuit with the cardiovascular system? It's a big loop, right? From arteries to arterioles to capillary beds to venules up to veins. Lymphatic system is a one-way system. It starts with these kind of root-like, if you will, blind-ended lymphatic vessels, lymphatic capillaries, in fact, that pick up the excess fluids and then start drawing it back and taking it back towards the main part of the cardiovascular system. Now, again, like the cardiovascular system, we're going to be moving these fluids along, but along the way, we have these little filtering points. So much like your pool, maybe, where we have a series of tubes that collect some of the fluid, run it through a series of filters, and then dump it back into the main body. We have that same thing here, right? So these lymph nodes, as well as some other lymphatic organs, do this job of filtering the lymph, getting rid of these things that we call pathogens, these infectious agents like bacteria and viruses, or even dead cells or something like that, or even cancerous cells, getting rid of them, and then finally dumping this cleaned fluid back into the cardiovascular system. But you can see it's a one-way system in terms of this flow of lymph. Okay, so we just a little bit of the anatomy of that. We talk about, again, major lymphatic vessels, and these are the 2 points right here and here, or here, and also over on this right side, the thoracic duct comes in here as well. These are the places where we're dumping it back into the cardiovascular system. And these are these filtering points. These are the lymph nodes. So you can see that they've got different types of defensive cells in there, what we call macrophages, big eating cells. T cells, these are T lymphocytes, and B cells, these are B lymphocytes that we mentioned in the cardiovascular system. So before, when we were mentioning these as a type of white blood cell, remember we have 5 types, we said that they provide immunity. But in this chapter, in this system, we'll learn exactly what they do in order to give us that long-term protection. But they're going to be found in these filtering points, and so once they do their job of getting rid of these pathogens and things we don't want in there, then our clean fluid is going to head its way back to the cardiovascular system. And you can see these nodes, these filtration points, are located all over the body. The cervical is submandibular ones are ones that are often palpated at the doctor's office, sometimes the axillary ones like you see here as well, but they're all over the place, more and more as you get closer to the cardiovascular center. All right, so we have relatively few lymphatic organs. It's more on a cellular level, but we do have the thymus and the spleen. And the thymus, sometimes people can confuse that with the thyroid. Here is the thyroid, this butterfly-shaped endocrine organ that sits near the thyroid cartilage. And then here is the thymus. So the thymus sits just superior to the heart. It's very important as you are a child, when you are getting exposed to all of these different new diseases. It is a training ground, like a boot camp for our T cells, our T lymphocytes. And so it's very important and very active and very big when you are young. But as you go through life, it gets smaller and smaller. The booger stage and the eat dirt stage, that's when our thymus is getting exposed to a lot of these things. That's when we need a lot of troops or a lot of T cells that are becoming activated or becoming part of our bodily defenses. And that's occurring there in the thymus. Okay. So we move on from the fluid part and the components of the immune system or lymphatic system to the bodily defenses part. And you certainly need to know this term here, pathogens, which are these disease-causing agents, like we said, that are usually bacteria or viruses. Now, here's the thing that we want to do in terms of kind of keeping the immune system and the lymphatic system organized in our head, because again, we don't have like the respiratory system or some of our other system like the nervous system or whatever, even the muscular system, where you can point to certain muscles and go, oh, that one's there and that one does that, that one's there and that one does that. This one, we don't have a lot of big organs, so we need to keep it organized in another way. And the way that we do, and the way you want to make a flashcard or something like that, is it's organized into 3 different lines of defense. And the first one is going to be what's called a non-specific defense. So in this way, it does not protect you against some particular pathogen. It's like most any pathogen, okay? Whereas, and this is, so this is non-specific, and it is external or extrinsic. So these are your outer defenses, trying to protect from things coming inside. Now, if they breach that outer wall, right, a wall is going to protect you against all kinds of things, then we get to our specific defenses. And if we breach the outer wall, of course, then we're going to be inside. So these are going to be internal. Now, oh, I'm sorry. It's definitely going to be internal, but we have these series of cells and molecules on the inside that are still looking to protect you against all kinds of things. So our second line of defense also is non-specific. When we get to the third line of defense, that's when we have T cells and B cells that are looking to protect you in very particular ways against very particular pathogens. Like, what particular virus is it? Is it the Zika virus? Is it a flu virus? Is it the herpes virus? Something like that. This innermost and most specific layer here is the one that is targeting particular pathogens and protecting you from them, hopefully long term. Okay, so when you look at that, you want to keep an eye on those 3 levels of defense, okay? So for each of those, for the first, second, and third lines of defense, make a flashcard. Make those lines on the front, or write 3 lines of defense on the front, and then write those characteristics on the back. When you are doing those different defenses, you're going to then write up another flashcard. So write, first line of defense, non-specific external. And then on the back of the card, write some examples. So for instance, here's an example. The fact that there are certain diseases that are specific to a particular species or organism. So something that you can get, but your dog can't, or a bird can't, or vice versa. So there's a variety of different examples of our first line of defense. Your unbroken skin and mucous membranes are 2 good examples, right? Outer defenses keep things from getting in. Even things like gastric juice and different types of secretions count as external defenses, non-specific. They burn up, if you will. Gastric juice burns up all kinds of things, right? Your 5-second rule, etc. All right, so second big flashcard, you're going to write second line of defense on there. You're going to put some examples of our internal non-specific defenses once we breach the wall, okay? So you're going to list a few of these as your second line of defense that we'll see coming up. Now, what I would say is Do some other layers of flashcards where you're defining what each one of those are. What are interferons and what do they do? What's fever and what does it do? What's inflammation and what does it do? Okay, phagocytosis, etc. Those are all examples of second line of defense, so you'd want to write those on the back of your second line of defense card, but then have an additional card that defines phagocytosis. What's a cell that does phagocytosis and what do they do, right? These are eating machines, basically. Okay, then you get to your third line of defense. And third line of defense, we said it's specific and it's internal. And so you're going to write some examples of that. And the examples that we see of our third line of defense are going to be T cells and B cells. Okay, these are T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. Now, from there, what you're going to find is you're going to definitely going to want to make flashcards that are specific to T cells and how they work, and then other flashcards specific to B cells and how they work. So for instance, we have 3 different types of T cells: helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, and then memory T cells of both of those. You want to write that on the back and maybe write a definition for each. Why are they called helper T cells or cytotoxic or memory? Okay. The other thing that you want to write down is be able to, on a flashcard, write down a better description, a more detailed description of how, for instance, the cytotoxic T cell that we see here on the left, how it does its role in getting rid of an infected body cell. Okay, so you can see how it secretes things. These are called granzymes or perforins that work to get rid of these infected body cells. Okay, so you want to understand, how does a T cell do its job of getting rid of an infected cell, like a cancerous cell or a virus-infected cell, etc. Okay, then we get to the B cells, or the B lymphocytes, and the B lymphocytes, same thing. You want to, on the back of that flashcard, for how B cells do their job, describe the fact that B cells produce antibodies. So when we read about antibodies before, when we talked about them with the blood, etc., these are where those antibodies come from. And these antibodies are produced by B cells that get activated by matching up. They have receptors on the cell surface. Each one's different, like you see. And when we have one that matches up with a particular antigen, foreign antigen, right? This is like the foreign antigen are these ID tags that are on the outside of pathogens. And when this B cell has the right receptor that matches with it, this one will be effective at getting rid of it. So we need a whole bunch we need a whole clone army of these B cells, which we call plasma cells. They're like big, incredible Hulk cells. And these start cranking out these antibodies that will then bind with that particular foreign pathogen and work to get rid of it. Okay, so this one here just kind of shows some of the overview information about this third line of defense in terms of T cells and B cells, where they come from, where they mature. B cells actually mature in the bone marrow. T cells mature in the thymus. And then how they do their job in terms of getting rid of the pathogens that have entered your body. The B cells produce antibodies, like we said. The cytotoxic T cells, these do the hand-to-hand combat. These are cell-mediated immunity. They will bind with a foreign cell and then rain down those chemicals upon it in order to kill it off. Okay? So make flashcards, break it into small things, and keep the ideas, the organization of the immune cell. Keep that organization clear for yourself, because that will help you in this somewhat complicated system that we call the immune system. All right, I think that'll do it.